Montero, who is an associate lecturer and PhD candidate at University of Chichester, to introduce him.
Hello everybody, I am very happy to introduce Associate Professor at York University, Danielle Robinson. She will be presenting today on after-school Samba Preservation, Authority and Memory in the Bahian Recôncavo. And for your information, Danielle has also got a book coming out forthcoming on the 1st of July entitled Modern Moves, Dancing Race During the Ragtime and Jazz Eras. Take it over.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking Claire for putting this together. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak with you about cultural memory and dance. Cultural memory isn't something that I have used to apply to my work before, so I really enjoyed the challenge of thinking through how memory is embodied in the dancing that I've been researching. So thank you for that, Claire. So After School Samba, Preservation, Authority, and Memory in the Bahian Recôncavo. The spectacular and sexy samba of Rio de Janeiro has captured the imagination of many around the world. Lightning fast feet, reverberating hips, and graceful outstretched arms, paired with feathered and sequined headdresses and scant clothing, have represented Samba, Rio, and indeed Brazil globally for almost a century. So that's the video that I didn't mention today. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Rio Samba, I wanted to just give a brief introduction, just a 1-minute clip. This is Portela from about 10 years ago. What I like about this clip is that it shows kind of the space where it's happening and the relationship between bodies and space. I apologize that this is on YouTube, but my video didn't work.
Is this a Bahian samba?
No, this is Rio de Janeiro. Yeah, so I'm going to, this is a contrast to sort of bring you in to where I'm going. All right. Actually has roots in Bahia, a northeastern state, which was the colonial capital for the importation of slaves and exportation of sugar. In fact, it was the liberated slaves who brought Bahian Samba to Rio at the end of the 19th century, where it evolved, adapted, and shifted into a distinct form and eventually became linked with carnival celebrations there. So just to help ground us a little more, this is Brazil. Bahia is this giant state here that's green, and Salvador is on the Bay of All Saints, right where that arrow is. And this is the region that I'm going to be talking about today. The Bay of All Saints, Salvador, the capital, is where the star is there. And the region around the bay is called the Recôncavo, and this is where the plantations were. And these cities are the different cities I've visited and where there were sort of hubs for the sugar industry. So this origin story is familiar to many people in Brazil, but it has a different layer of meaning for those from the Northeast, where Bahian Samba, known locally as Samba Chahoda, continues to thrive as one of the many vital thriving on music and dance practices that emerged from this region's multi-African slave cultures. I'd like to share with you a video of Samba Jehuda. This is a video put together by UNESCO. This isn't my creation. It's a nice
The Samba Preservation, which involves music, dance and poetry, is a popular festive event that developed in the state of Bahia in the region of Recôncavo during the 17th century. It drew heavily on the dances and cultural
that voice bothers me a lot. I apologize. But Samba Jehuda looks like many different things throughout the region. It's not one thing. So that's why I like this video, that it has the different styles of Samba Jehuda that's based in different regions.
popular culture among Brazilians of African descent. The Samba de Roda was eventually taken by migrants to Rio de Janeiro, where it influenced the evolution of the urban samba that became a symbol of Brazilian national identity in the 20th century. It is generally performed only by women, each one taking her turn in the centre of the ring, surrounded by others dancing in the circle while clapping their hands and singing. The choreography is often improvised and based on the movements of the feet, legs and hips. One of the most typical movements is the famous belly push, the umbigada, a testimony of Bantu influence, used by the dancer to invite her successor into the centre of the circle. The Samba de Roda is also distinguished by specific dance steps, like the miudinho, the use of the viola machete, a small lute with plucked strings from Portugal, as well as strummed instruments and responsorial songs.
So throughout the 20th century, Samba Jehuda was the dancing that accompanied birthday parties and helped fans celebrate football victories. It could close a capoeira game or enliven an Afro-diasporic religious event after the spirits had left. In rural Bahia in particular, it has been an alternative to the forró and quadrilhas used to commemorate the June festivals in celebration of Catholic saints. All generations, genders, and abilities could participate either as musicians or dancers. Despite being the origin of the national dance, Samba Jehuda has never attained the fame or fortune of its descendant. In Brazil, Rio Samba is considered authentic samba and revered nationally and internationally for its glamour and cosmopolitanness. In contrast, if noticed at all, Samba Jehuda has often been treated as a dusty relic. Even in Bahia, where it has enjoyed continuous practice for centuries, Samba Jehuda is widely viewed as something that poor Afro-Brazilians do, and a repository for vanishing local cultural memories of slavery and plantation life. Interestingly enough, it was this strong association with a fading past that led Samba Jehuda to be proclaimed in 2005 a masterpiece of oral and intangible heritage by UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. I'll just show you a few images of that. So they sent a team out to create, Brazil sent a team out to document Samba Jehuda, to put together a dossier as part of the application to become a masterpiece. And so these images were done by a professional photographer, the images that you'll see here in the middle. This is the web page on the UNESCO website that they put together after the recognition. They, Brazil's heritage organization called IFAM put together a CD where they went around and recorded different groups in the region, and then they sold this and gave away this CD. And this is the dossier book that they put together, it, except that it's very heavy. And it tried to represent the diversity of Samba Chahota, but it also referred to it as in a singular way, that this is Samba Chahota. So there's a lot of tension around this, and that's part of what I'm going to go into today. Samba Chahota was nominated instead of Rio Samba after much debate, according to Carlos Sandroni, the ethnomusicologist who coordinated the candidacy dossier on behalf of IFAM. Because of the UNESCO requirement that a masterpiece be in need of safeguarding, it has to be at risk of extinction. As much as Brazilians might have wanted to see nationalized samba, or even capoeira awarded this international distinction, neither could be considered dying or vulnerable practices, so they were passed up for nomination. Samba Chahota then, as the precursor to Rio Samba, was proposed as Brazil's candidate for masterpiece designation. Its starring role in Rio Samba's origin story connected it to constructions of the nation, and thus it could be celebrated across the country as an extension of people's love of samba more generally. Unlike Rio Samba, though, Samba Chahota could be conceivably framed as endangered as required by UNESCO, given that relatively few people practiced it or valued it in Brazil or anywhere else. The result, however, was that Samba Chahota, in its mass media debut, became strongly associated with the aged and indigent in UNESCO's public representations. Weathered hands slapping panderos and knees, swirling skirts in bright tropical shades, sweaty, dark, grinning faces with sparkling eyes, broken down rubber sandals, or better yet, bare feet, stirring up dust and sand, wide open mouths, missing teeth, singing in full-throated joy, gyrating hips and shaking flesh. These are the portrayals of Samba Chahota that have circulated nationally and internationally by UNESCO. Consequently, authenticity within this practice has come to be aligned with age, poverty, and rurality, even more so than before. So I have a few images that I selected from the dossier that were taken professionally. This is Dona Orinda. This one, they didn't give a name of this woman, but they named her group, her samba group. I first encountered Samba Chahota while living for a year in the capital city of Salvador between 2004 and 2005. I was immediately enraptured by the music and dancing. It felt like sunshine coursing through my body. Eventually, I found other researchers living nearby who felt the same way. One of them was my husband, which was nice, but there were other researchers that I encountered there. And eventually, in the years since, we built a loose-knit research team, 2 music researchers and 2 dance researchers, 2 Brazilians, 2 North Americans. We were able to get funding to do field work together, and we've been writing and publishing together as well, sometimes in pairs, sometimes on our own, but the book that we're creating is all of us as editors, and we're contributing our pieces as well as local artists and community leaders are going to be contributing pieces as well. So it'll be more of a dialogue between artists and scholars. I would also like to mention that the writing up phase of this research was sponsored by the Lieberman Trust and University of Chichester. Thanks to Claire. So I just want to make sure I acknowledge that as well. In my experiences, during the 2 years of cumulative fieldwork in Bahia that I've done since 2004, I found that Samba Chahota does indeed draw to it older community members more so than younger, but it's far from dying. Overlooked is not the same as dying, non-commercialized is not the same as in danger, and rooted in the past is not the same as a relic. Rio Samba has dramatically overshadowed Samba Chahota during the 20th century due to its nationalization, commercialization, and mediatization. In its shadow, Samba Chahota has led a comparatively quiet life in rural Bahia, where it still knits communities and families together. The quietude of Samba Chahota's existence was ruptured in 2005 when UNESCO proclaimed it a masterpiece and recognized it internationally. But rather than critiquing this process today, which would be really fun, but there's not enough time, and also I think Barbara Kirschenblatt, Gimlet, and George Udisi have done a great job critiquing UNESCO's process. I want to instead focus on some of the ways in which practitioners have responded to the increased attention. In particular, I'd like to discuss how Bahian Samba artists have asserted their cultural ownership and stewardship in the wake of UNESCO recognition, and UNESCO claiming Samba Chahota on behalf of humanity. One manifestation of this impulse, and there were many, was the creation of several after-school arts programs housed in community centers and elementary schools that offered local kids opportunities to practice Samba Chahota together. All the programs involved local artists to varying degrees, although some were spearheaded by non-artists and funded by government and corporate sources. These programs mobilize a multi-layered strategy that on the one hand negotiates complex post-plantation politics and histories, and then on the other affirms an alternative model for authority rooted in embodied experience that in the end empowers children as knowledge and culture bearers. Having seen Samba Chahota turned into a cultural commodity and even a scholarly artifact that doesn't necessarily bring them any benefit, thanks to the UNESCO recognition, local artists want to make sure that the next generation is invested in Samba Chahota's future, not just its past. So I'd like to show a video of the after-school programs, and I think this is the one. Yeah, this one didn't work. I have to pull it from here. So this is my footage of one of the after-school programs we visited. So I'm trying to sound it again.
No, it's off on the video. Yeah.
It's off on the video. Okay, let me pause.
Just to
There it is.
yeah.
Okay. And is that full screen? There we go. All right. overseeing things in a way that she doesn't normally. So she's making sure they behave because there's foreigners there filming and things like that. And so they're not having quite as much fun with it as they normally do. They're sort of more organized and more, they're going one by one. Normally it's more of a free-for-all, and this doesn't quite have the energy of the other times that we've been there. The gentlemen over here are the leaders of the group. I changed the name of the paper for anonymity's sake, Joao and Seo Pingo. And then these are the children. They come from, well, I'll tell you more about them in a moment, but I just want to make sure you had the sort of scene. Bahian children today certainly grow up seeing Samba Jahoda at community events monthly, if not weekly. But given its lack of glamour and contemporary allure, it's hard for Samba Jahoda to compete with these mediated practices from afar. This tendency of looking culturally outward is not unique to Bahians, but has been attributed to all Brazilians by ethnomusicologist Marta Delio Carvalho as part of their cross-cultural anthropophagia practices. So sort of anthropophagia, in this case, has to do with this image of sort of eating other cultures and making it your own in the process. And so young people in Bahia are typically more excited about urban Bahian genres such as pagode, or national music such as Rio Samba, and even international music such as pop, rock, and hip hop, which they call popi hoki and hippie hoki. All of which have a strong presence in local and national television and radio. So this is just a couple images of pagode based in Salvador, which is an hour away, but they see this on the television all the time and the internet, and listen to the music on the radio. In any case, these outside practices have the fascination of the city and cosmopolitanness, which is in stark contrast with the rural poverty that inhabits these children's lives. Moreover, such music dance genres are linked with the future instead of the past. In comparison, Samba Jahoda seems old, crude. It feels so rooted in the local past that it can seem foreign, although created right where they live and has been with them their entire lives. It's a kind of temporal other, as it preserves and conveys memories that they feel are not their own, and they might wish to disown. Bahia's rural youth live among the ruins of plantations, sugar mills, crumbling colonial architecture, but they're not really interested in slave cultures, nor the dancing that they and so many others continue to associate with it. The challenge then for Samba Jahoda leaders is to help children create their own positive embodied memories of Samba Jahoda to draw upon and build upon in the future, that can withstand the distraction and allure of national and international popular practices. But how can a practice so associated with the old, indigent, and even dominated be made relevant and attractive to these young people? The following is a brief description of these 3 community programs that we visited multiple times between 2007 and 2011. The first is a program housed at a private local history museum and is run by a community leader who loves samba but does not see herself as a samba artist. She hires a local male artist, Mestre Ratinho, Mr. Rat, to teach Samba Jahoda as well as other local expressive culture forms like capoeira. In addition to this bodily training, kids also participate in a large-scale drama produced by a local theater director, from the capital city. She hires this person in. In between these activities, the children receive training in personal hygiene, healthcare, and a free meal. The second program we went to occurred in an elementary school and was paid for by the local city government. 2 highly respected male Samba Jahoda artists were hired to come in twice a week. They worked with dozens of children and focused on 3 practices: capoeira, makulele, and Samba Jahoda. Is everyone familiar with capoeira? Sort of, okay. Makulele? No. It's a stick dance. Okay. While older children, both boys and girls, are given opportunities to learn drumming, which you don't see in the video. Both boys and girls do learn drumming. All are also expected to enter the circle, or the hoda, as movers. These 3 practices form the core of the program, but Samba Jahoda really is the center. In between activities, there was informal mentoring between the artists and the children in a grandfatherly, fatherly sort of way, but no direct health instruction. We visited this program several times, and everyone involved eventually felt comfortable with us taking pictures and video. In fact, they asked us to do so in order to document their program. So we took images and sound recordings and video and then gave them copies. And these are just a few images from one of our sessions. This is Seu Pingo and João with some children. Here is João teaching some of the rhythms to the boys. And this is a very different space from the other one. This is basically the lunchroom area of the school. It's a mixture of boys and girls of different ages. And eventually kids forget that the adults are there and just start interacting with each other. The third program we visited, which will be the primary focus of today's presentation, was at an extracurricular activity center funded by one of the national banks in Brazil. It was run by a professional administrator who hires, once again, 2 male artists to lead the expressive culture program there twice a week. The main difference from the others was that the children wear matching t-shirts, you saw in the video, the bright yellow and blue t-shirts that have the bank's logo on it. They also have a dedicated performance space that's just theirs to do Samba Preservation and ukulele and capoeira. The children were brought there daily after school from multiple schools in the area, and they were selected to participate if they were considered at risk by their teachers. So it wasn't, you couldn't apply because you had an interest in Samba Preservation or capoeira and ukulele. You had to be considered at risk. The approximately 40 students ranged in age from 5 to 15. Over the course of the class, the teachers alternated between playing instruments, directing the children's behaviors with words and more often with actions, and occasionally speaking to them about the practices in which they were engaged. Life lessons were also dispensed by the 2 leaders in between songs. Having already built a good relationship with the teachers, we were able to film on the very first day. This is where the video came from that I showed you. Just a few more images from his school. All these projects have undoubted value for a host of reasons. When we interviewed Thais, the administrator of the third program, she was much less interested in the roots angle and more interested in how the program was keeping kids off the street, who are at risk in very real ways owing to a growing drug trade extending from the capital city into the rural community. Thais felt that Samba Preservation taught the children important life skills, including listening, rule following, cooperation, paying attention, self-esteem, waiting your turn. The development of such life skills is easily visible when watching Seo Kingo and Joao work with the children. Since we did not interview the children for many reasons, it's hard for me to address directly the self-esteem improvements that Thais mentioned. That said, however, there are many indicators that local pride, which is surely connected to self-esteem, was being directly pursued by the program's leaders in implicit and explicit ways. And it's through the pursuit of local pride that I'll argue today that Samba Preservation artists seek through these children's arts programs to reclaim their cultural ownership and stewardship in the wake of UNESCO recognition. During the first of our visits to the third program, Thais formally welcomed us in a public speech in front of all the children. In addition to the usual niceties, we're so humble and for having you come from so far, that kind of stuff, she directed the children to demonstrate to us, quote, their unique hometown culture with respect and unity. This theme was further developed when one of the teachers followed the director's lead and gave a speech of his own. I don't think Thais liked that, but he grabbed the mic. After she finished, Seo Kingo stood up and reminded the students who were getting a little rambunctious that we had come from thousands of miles away to learn about their culture, and that they deserved such attention because of the richness of their cultural inheritances, and that this heritage was theirs to protect in the future. That's my translations of his speech. There was no mention of the nation, nationalism, nationalized Samba, or even UNESCO. In other words, Samba Preservation belonged to them and the Recôncavo alone. Such comments were not typical of our other visits there or of the other programs. Nonetheless, they offer a window into the logic behind the programs from the perspective of the people implementing them. These notions are clearly embedded in the curricular and pedagogical choices being made in all 3 programs, but rarely given voice to in such an explicit way. This emphasis on local culture is what distinguishes all these programs from similar community programs in Salvador, the capital city. This occurs through discourse, as just mentioned, but also through curricular design. Each of the 3 expressive culture practices that are included in the after-school programs, capoeira, ukulele, and Samba Preservation, is represented to the children as a distinct local creation by Afro-Brazilians, not Africans. So there's a shift there during the plantation era. Having Samba Preservation nestled between capoeira and ukulele only deepens its associations with the region and with local Afro-Brazilian peoples. Importantly, in the day-to-day conversations with the children, the leaders of the programs openly discuss African heritage in rural Bahia, but not Africa itself. The after-school Samba programs celebrate the contributions of African-descended Brazilian peoples to local expressive culture. Such valorization is folded into a broader discourse that emphasizes the particularities of the Recôncavo as a specific diasporic location. At the same time, however, it's vital to remember that the vast majority of participants in the program, and in Samba Jahoda more generally, are of visible African descent, and that their economic and educational circumstances are deeply entangled in the area's racial history, which includes colonization, slavery, plantation servitude, and maroonage. That said, these after-school Samba programs should not be defined as a racial project, although they are certainly attentive to the issues and implications of race. Instead, their didactic and ideological focus takes aim specifically at local concerns and populations, which are racially and culturally mixed, but deeply impacted by racial thinking. Thus, while notions of blackness and discourses of Afro-Brazilian history, as well as contemporary concerns, are addressed during classes, the only requirement for involvement is attendance in a public school in the region and being at risk, considered at risk. The overarching concern of these programs is the teaching of local citizenship and valorization of Recôncavo culture and identity. Overt racial politics are less foregrounded, even as their implications are omnipresent. Local artists want to instill a sense of stewardship in Recôncavo practices among the descendants of the region's historic culture bearers, the rural poor, and usually but not always descendants of former slaves. In addition to helping keep kids in school and off the street, providing them with instruction in basic life skills and enhancing their creative abilities, the explicit emphasis is on pride and involvement in local culture, as opposed to overtly, exclusively African or Afro-diasporic cultures. Even though these after-school programs are not explicitly racial, they do normalize blackness in important and empowering ways. They bring it to the center of local history, as opposed to marginalizing it on the one hand or fetishizing it as black or African on the other. This is in marked contrast to, for example, Black History Month initiatives in North America. Is there Black History Month? Mm-hmm. Okay, Black History Month in North America and Britain, which have been criticized for isolating a single relatively short period of time to recognize the contributions of African Americans while ignoring them during the rest of the year. Instead, these programs render Black history, peoples, and practices the heritage of the entire region and the legacy of all its citizens, but without racialist rhetoric, such as the strategic essentialism sometimes used by the famous carnival blocker Eliaye and Olodu. Which might alienate or enrage people who do not identify as Black or exoticize those who do. The strategic discursive move aims to dodge the highly charged local racial politics which are embedded in histories of official and unofficial slavery, and also promises to draw to the programs a maximum number of young people regardless of their background. Looked at from a cultural memory perspective, we can also appreciate how these programs transform negative memories of slavery and its associated tortures into positive memories of survival and strength. In this way, references to slavery's oppressive racial hegemonies are avoided. Furthermore, cultural memories that might be linked elsewhere via nationalist discourses, Brazilian nationalism or African nationalism, are redirected towards the Recôncavo and its rich past. Here we see a resignifying of official histories through cultural memory in order to appeal to contemporary youth participants, who might be especially sensitive to feeling inferior to externally or internally positioned dominating forces. In many ways, these after-school Samba programs are an extension of broader efforts to assert Samba Jahoda as a Recôncavo product in the wake of UNESCO recognition and the ensuing international interest. In conversations and interviews, residents mentioned time and again how much they resented having outsiders come in to document their practices as part of preparing the UNESCO dossier. The phrase, "and they left nothing behind," was repeated over and over and over again. It felt as if Samba Jahoda and the cultural memory embedded within it had been appropriated from them, along with their authority as experts and stewards of meaning, and as benefactors of its expediency. Furthermore, they are suspicious of the producers dancers from the more developed areas of southern Brazil and even Europe who have come to the area after UNESCO recognition, looking for the next Buena Vista social club. In fact, it took several visits and many more explicit demonstrations of our good intentions before local residents would consent to participate in our research project and become less guarded in their conversations with us, which is why in the end we designed our project in such a collaborative way. Not that we were going to be extractive in any case, but we became even more collaborative in the design and implementation of the project in the end. Similarly, even as some Sambadores look to the example of capoeira as an instance of what George Udisi might theorize as the expediency of culture, that is, the capacity of expressive practices to provide a means of political and social empowerment, capoeira is also a cautionary tale. Many voice concerns to us about the commercializing, nationalizing, and even globalizing of capoeira since the 1930s. As a result, many local practices and practitioners have been marginalized, and a degree of control over the tradition, as well as its rewards, has shifted to external and already empowered governing bodies and organizations. Surprisingly, none of our collaborators expressed concern over commodification in and of itself. In fact, many, if not most, of our interlocutors wanted very much to earn money from Samba. Thus, their concern is with who benefits and how, and importantly, what the sounds and images would convey, i.e., whose version of Samba Jahoda was going to be valued. Thus, while we occasionally heard disagreements and tensions over the authenticity of certain groups' performances, usually expressed by a rival group, we heard unified concern about public performances that violated certain basic and fundamental conventions, procedures, and values in Samba Jahoda. No one wants Samba Jahoda radically diluted, distorted, or simplified. But change is not the issue, nor is variation, as much as transformation that neglects the essence of Samba Jahoda from their expert perspectives. This kind of transformation would render the local artists' unique contributions less valuable, of course, as well as threaten in their minds Samba Jahoda's future. This is where the Samba Jahoda programs promise to intervene most significantly. In addition to transmitting and simply valorizing the practice, local artists are actively teaching children to participate in Samba Jahoda in a manner that is consistent with what they value in movement and sonic practices. Joao, one of the teachers, stressed to us on numerous occasions that they were trying to make Samba Jahoda into something that local youth would not be ashamed of. Key here, though, is that they're not constructing a codified version of an authentic Samba Jahoda. Instead, they're instilling correct technique in the students from their perspective. Our productive rubric for thinking through this subtle negotiation has been theorized by anthropologist Michelle Bahian in her writing about Bolivian indigenous music. In exploring the tensions over various notions of authenticity deployed in different contexts, Bahian teases out 3 different kinds of authenticity, 2 of which apply to what we're talking about today. Applied to this case study, representations, commodifications, and valorizations of Samba Jahoda by outside interests, such as by visitors, scholars, producers, NGOs, other institutions, tend to emphasize what she calls cultural historical authenticity, which she associates with asserting a, quote, a continuity with an imagined point of origin situated in a historical and mythical past. This is exemplified in the abundance of images of the aged Black moving bodies, reference to the pastoral Bahian Recôncavo, and concerns over the loss of humanities and the Brazilian nation-state's treasured heritage in so much of the recent discourse about Samba Jahoda. But in their emphasis on practice during the after-school sessions, by contrast, artists privilege the embodiedness of local culture, a key aspect of Bahian's notion of experiential authenticity. Certainly, they also build on narratives of history and infuse their teaching with a discourse resonant with cultural historical authenticity. However, a sense of embodied knowing and the local pride it engenders is firmly rooted in the doing, and doing in a manner approved by local authorities rather than those whose expertise derives from, for example, schooling, media presence, racial privilege, etc. In this context, local artists are not relying on associations with prescribed cultural memories as much as lived experience. In a sense, they're building new cultural memories with these children as a way of focusing on the future and moving forward. As it applies to the more quotidian concerns addressed, hygiene, staying in school, good citizenship, these programs situate knowing at home, as identified by Brazilian educational theorist Paulo Freire. Whereas outsiders inform so much of the educational experiences of Brazilian children, through these arts programs, Bahian children are now receiving information from one of their own, quote, one of their own. Moreover, through their participation in coming to know the very practices that grant authority to their teachers, they are now empowered to take control over their own knowing, wresting it from the threat of outside and elite interest, as has for so long been the case in Brazil. Though implemented in a small scale, after-school samba program in a little city in an impoverished region, this vision for locally focused arts education and grassroots community uplift provides a methodology for disarming some of Brazil's most long-standing and disempowering colonial legacies, especially entrenched social hierarchies, while at the same time helping secure the future of one of its most unique performance traditions. In conclusion, these after-school samba programs are doing much more than just transmitting music and dance skills. In a sense, they're passing on the responsibility of stewardship to the next generation. To do so, they put far less emphasis on the past and its complex cultural memories, and more on the future and its possibilities. In this way, the artists involved subtly contest the impact of UNESCO recognition, as well as the dominance of Rio de Janeiro's samba legacies. Their aim is to reestablish and indeed assert their samba region's authority, not just its authenticity, in order to maintain control over their practices in the wake of national and international interest. In this case, cultural memory is not just about the past, it's also about the future. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going to come up and join you slowly. Claire, how would you think
I think we can probably go 10 minutes into lunchtime to give us 20 minutes.
Okay, so into 40 or 45-ish?
Yeah.
Around there. Great, well thank you very much, Danielle, for a really engaging and presentation. I think it's bringing up a lot of conversation about national and transnational memories. So I wanted to kick off with a question. I'm interested in this idea of the children being selected due to this terminology of being at risk. I'm interested in this theme of like precarity in terms of the form being in this precarious situation and it needing to be, the form is at risk of perhaps not being remembered in a certain way. So I'm wondering how do you know, can we unpack this at risk in terms of the students who are selected, and do you know more about that process?
My understanding is they're nominated by their teachers, but they have to get permission by their caregivers. And so it involves administrators from the school going out to their neighborhoods and trying to get someone to sign a piece of paper saying the kids can come. And the administrator, Thais, explained that sometimes they can't find anyone to claim the children. You know, that they just find a neighbor who will sign it, or someone who calls himself an auntie of some kind. That these kids, in some cases, are truly fending for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's interesting the at-risk kids and the at-risk dance
Yeah.
Being brought together, and maybe in this school it's not at-risk kids. It's the one with the blue and yellow t-shirts. So this is just anybody interested can stay after school and do this. The one that's pictured here. So in the longer version of the paper, I talk a bit more about these kids' lives and what's going on, and the impact of the drug trade on the community. And I tried in the interview that we did with the administrator to find out more about these kids, what happens to them after the program, if there's any impact that this has on their lives. And I got a little bit of pushback from the administrator because I was, being an academic, I'm like, do you have any numbers? Is there anyone we can talk to? Is there, do you have any statistics? And she's like, we're trying to make sure these kids are fed. That's why don't you find out the impact of this? And I'm like, okay, all right, I can take that. Absolutely, I can take that critique. But these kids, part of why they're there, they don't consider themselves at risk necessarily, right? So that's, they don't identify with that label. But I think part of what motivates them is the positive experience with the other children. Seopingo and Joao are great guys that are community leaders. They're highly respected, and so it's a chance to spend time with them. They're kind of, they really take the children under their wing, and I think it gives them a mooring in a way in their lives that's significant. So I'm planning to go back next summer and hope to follow up with these artists and children and see where the programs are, where the kids are, and see if anything's changed, right, for the kids and with the dancing and the programs.
I also wanted to ask in connection to this theme. You mentioned there's these kind of exterior influences, pedagogy, and some kind of popular, perhaps foreign media. So this also seems like a risk in terms of there's a risk that they may remember some kind of different lineage. And could you speak to the tension between the kind of the pedagogy and the kind of popular media and this movement?
You could even see it playing out in the video. I didn't want to bring attention to it and distract you, but a lot of the corrections that are happening in the program is the leaders are trying to keep the kids from doing pedagogy movement. So when the kids were really shaking their bottoms and being kind of sexy, that's considered more pedagogy. The true Samba Jahoda style, from their perspective, is very quiet and subtle in the movements, demure almost. And so that's part of the push and pull that happens, where the kids want to bring into the Hoda all of their movement experiences, not just what they're being trained in. And so it's really interesting. And so the pedagogy is associated with sex and drugs and things like that. And so that's part of another reason why they don't want the kids idealizing it very much. But they consume visually more pedagogy than they do Samba Jahoda. And it looks much more glamorous and exciting than Samba Jahoda from their perspective. And so that's part of what they're trying to save the kids from, in a way. It's interesting. There's a lot of negativity around pedagogy connected with this resurgence of Samba Jahoda in the wake of UNESCO. In some ways, they're trying to save Samba Jahoda from pedagogy, because the movement's actually quite related, right? It's just another iteration of the Samba route, right? It's another iteration. The difference is they tend to stand still and gyrate more than traverse the space. And so part of planting the feet, it enables the hips to do more things. And it enables it to be danced in different spaces than just the circle. Right? So I myself enjoy pedagogy. But I think that the drug trade eats children in these communities. It absolutely eats them. They call them airplanes, avions, because they use the kids to carry drugs, the drug dealers in the rural cities, little regions, as well as in the capital. And so having these kids at school means they're not in the neighborhood to be avions. So this is a very real, it is saving them from potentially being involved in that. And especially given that they don't have caregivers looking out for them in some cases, the people who sell drugs in neighborhoods, in a way, are the community leaders in some of their neighborhoods and could easily bring these children into their businesses.
Okay, well, I have plenty more questions, but I'm going to open it up now. Melissa, do you want to?
Yeah. I'm interested in the gender politics of Samba and how it gets transferred. And first I think it's kind of hilarious, this photo, because on top there's this picture of a white man in black and white picture looking down. So then there's that kind of, that to me is a huge historical kind of photograph, sort of like the plantation owner looking, you know, yeah. And then also I see more, it looks like there's more boys than girls, even though that the dance form is danced by women in a circle. And then I'm thinking of the slippers that the women wear as kind of domestic housework footwear, and then how they're able to dance with those slippers. And might this, I'm thinking of the transfer of sort of this feminist practice of Samba, and I know that's me inserting feminist practice to the idea of Samba, but can you speak a bit about how perhaps this taking care of the children becomes a way that Samba that maintains its feminist practice of taking care of history, of memory, I don't know, of cultivating. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? This thing of taking care of, gestating and then protecting, so that the thing can be nourished.
What's interesting is that these programs are all taught by men. That's what's interesting. Men. All of the artists that are hired in to do these programs are men. And I think, I wasn't told this, but my thought was, maybe this is a way of bringing in strong father figures into their lives, perhaps. Or maybe that male artists are seen as professionals more than female artists. Or that the women artists are busy doing other things and can't be freed up from their regular duties to come and do this kind of thing. So the gender politics of what we were seeing in the schools bothered me from the beginning, but I didn't know how to grapple with it, because it wasn't just in the programs, it was an extension of what was going on in daily life in the region, right? But what's interesting is that they do teach both the boys and girls drumming, but usually what happens is the girls are in the hoda first, and then at a certain point, a guy, one of the kids, boys, will come in to be sort of like a jokester in the middle of it, sort of making fun of himself for entering the hoda. I don't know if you saw that, but they had a very silly kind of way, that they weren't necessarily doing the hip movement that the girls were the whole time. So there's definitely, and that is what happens in a regular Samba with adults. That traditionally the men play instruments and the women are the primary dancers, and then a man will come in occasionally to dance with a woman or dance by himself, and he tends to have a very different movement vocabulary and style than the woman does. So he's more of an exception to the rule. Samba is associated with women. Let me take it back to a slide. So referring to the domesticity. So, and this one's even better. Okay. So what you see here is sort of the traditional clothing of the Bahiana, the original Carmen Miranda, right? So, but this was also based on the clothing of what a domestic worker in the plantation era would have worn. And so, and this is what an idealized Samba Chahota female dancer wears as well. And so we have this practice that celebrates women and femininity, taking care of children, as you were saying, but it's being run by men, which is interesting. But what's also interesting is that the two men that you saw in the pictures, one of them is the child of the most senior Samba Chahota dancer in town. And so she is Indonesia, and she, you can actually see her in a picture here, not in the front, but in the back. There she is, and she has traveled to Europe doing Samba Jahoda. She's traveled throughout Latin America doing Samba Jahoda. She's one of the very first leaders of us. Her group is one of the very first groups to travel outside the region to represent the region. And she is very proud of that. And so her son is Drow, which is interesting. So in a way, he's there by her permission, right? So there's very complex things going on in terms of gender in the programs and in the practice, and don't know where else to take it. I mean, to me, what's interesting, I don't think that, even though there's traditional gender roles operating, I can also see how the practice is teaching these girls things that are important for their lives. And so they are getting access to male, positive male attention, because a lot of these girls can also end up in the child sex trade. And so they're building positive relationships with men, which is very important. They are learning sort of positive associations with sexuality, which I think is good, because the dancing is sexual, sexy, sensual, and I think that it's good for them to have those associations, because pagoji images, and I don't think I chose ones that were particularly dirty. It was hard to find images that weren't really raunchy and offensive, so this was the best I could do. But the images of pagoji are very, involve violence against women, involve degradation, and so that's part of saving them from pagoji is Samba Jahoda is protecting them from that.
Maria?
Yeah, hello, morning. Yeah, thank you for this wonderful talk. In relation to this subject, I would like to make a comment. I was in Salvador de Bahia, the UFA, in 2006. I think we talked about this before. And I was interviewing this wonderful woman, Lia Robato, who was the first woman, the first dancer who introduced these programs in Salvador. So she is kind of like the mother of the popular dance in Salvador in order to help children going out of the streets. And she established the MA program, the PhD program. She established all social programs related to dance. I interviewed her. She was absolutely fascinating, and I asked her about her job, and she was telling me that she was trying to take out the children of the streets and introduce them into the different ballets, the ballets folklorico da Bahia, in order to get these children an education and a job for the future. Some of them, they were hired as dancers by other ballets abroad. And what happened is, like, I asked her about the girls. What happened with the girls? So the girls apparently, they start having this education in dance as well. But at the age of 12 or 13, because they're coming to a very, very low part of the societies, the girls were stopped their formation. So she was very sad because she could not find a way to get the girls going on the formation, because they start having children at 15, they were being raped by their fathers, they have doing a very, very difficult life. So I see that it was a gender problem and a different way of living the social dance programs for boys and for girls, because the girls definitely had another circumstances in their lives. And I found absolutely fascinating the way also that because Samba de Roda start to be acknowledged by UNESCO, it's means that certain movements start to be erased and controlled by such a superior organization. So many Bahian might be very happy that Samba de Roda is acknowledged and recognized as a cultural heritage, but on the other side, I see that it's such an intromission in the children's free body expression, you know, that it's so, the lecture of the body is so sexualized by others, by superiors, by whites. So I think it's a very complex analysis we have here in our hands. So because what is sexual, what a girl with 8 years old is doing, and why we have to tell them what to do or what to do. I mean, I'm not telling them. Well, thank you anyway. Just a comment.
I was just going to say that even these programs can be seen as controlling when you look at the some of the intentions of some of the people who started them. When I talked to the woman who started the first program and the woman who started the third program, they're both white middle-class women who see themselves as community leaders, and they're trying to save these children and teach them how to wipe their bums. Like she's like, we're going to teach them how to wipe their bums. That's what we're here for. That it's about, you know, healthcare and, you know, teaching them, you know, giving them a hot meal, and, you know, and then you have these artists who are coming in and wanting it to be about something else, which is really interesting. And so there's a way in which they're trying to, they're civilizing, right? They're trying to, they see these children in some ways as animals, and they're trying to civilize them. So there's this, but I see that there's this impetus to control, but then you also see, I think the artists are quite crafty. They're coming in and saying, okay, you want to have this program, you want a little culture, fine. We're going to do it the way we want to do it in order to push back against the UNESCO initiative. And I had never thought of UNESCO in a positive or negative way before going into the field and doing all this work, but the people that we spoke with, because we started doing research right as the dossier was getting put together and all of this, and so they are, I don't think I heard a single positive thing about UNESCO actually, and we've been going back and forth for a decade. Not a single positive thing. Yeah.
I think it's doing a lot of good work. I think it does do. I don't know who the head of it is. Do you know who the head of it now is? Do you know who the head of it is? I don't know. But I have done Sedun and Huxley, I mean, to promote cultural understanding, public philosophy work, and world history, so it's not altogether useless.
Well, I think that, I mean, I'm just reporting what the artists felt, that they felt like people had come in and taken away their culture and their memories, and that was their feeling. I think that perhaps it was the personalities of the people involved, but I think also they kept saying, and they left nothing behind, and so I think if UNESCO had left more tangible things behind in this case, I don't know about the other cases, but in this case, then they might have felt more like it was a partnership or a collaboration. They felt fleeced. In a way. Yeah, so it's just the way things were handled in this particular circumstance.
Okay.
Do we just have one more question?
Okay, I think Claire's had to finish.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of related to gender and the women that really struck me at the beginning of the UNESCO film that just completely disappeared, essentially, it seemed. And, you know, they're potentially a really good role model for these young girls because they're dancing internationally and presumably making some kind of living out of it. And whether they come into the schools and dance, and what's the relationship between dance and the school, and whether the girls and boys in school then are taken in by the community as dancers and have other areas to dance and other areas to perform and other areas to develop those skills and other role models, both male and female, in the community that are both musicians and dancers, whether the gender play in the school is affecting adult dancing in the community and changing those roles. So, you know, the kind of larger picture of how dance is changing through these children and where are these women? It's really strange.
Well, they're not in the programs, but a lot of the Samba Chahota groups are headed up by women, which is interesting. They, a lot of the professionalized groups, the groups that have become professionalized, are headed up by women. And so a part of the story that I didn't put in just to sort of simplify the paper is that close to where these programs happened, they created a Casa de Samba, a Samba house. Okay? And that's where they did the big launch, the UNESCO launch of Samba and a bunch of hoopla. They renovated this old plantation house and turned it into a center for Samba. And so the kids also have access to programs going on at the Casa de Samba, which is where a lot of the groups can rehearse for free. And so I think it's a really good question if there's mentorship happening. If these kids are doing these after-school programs and then are drawn to the Casa to participate in these groups individually. My guess is that these groups tend to be very local, very tied to a community, these different Samba groups. And so my guess is they'd be more likely to affiliate with a group that is connected with their neighborhood than a group from another neighborhood or another region that would be at the Casa. But there's the Casa de Samba is designed to be kind of an intersection point. I don't know if the children are going there, but I know they can. And they also have separate drumming lessons on Saturdays there, where the kids can do even further enrichment if they wish. So that's a good question to take into the field, to see if these same kids, just to follow these kids to see if they're also going and participating in the programs.
In terms of authority of cultural memory, you know, it's interesting that this guy is given authority because of his lineage to his mother, but
that's right.
Again, where is she? It's just really, whether he's going around the region and bringing his mother's type of dance to other communities as well, so the kind of diaspora of her dance in a sense as well, how that's shifting.
That he's given the fish of mobility.
And he might go and spread it around, but yeah.
Knowing his mother, and she's a bit of a iconoclast, but she might feel like going to the schools is a little beneath her, that she sees herself as a Samba star, and that she's not going to do that, that it would be for her a step down to do that. She does performances, you pay her to perform, you don't pay her to go to the schools twice a week. I think she would see that as, yeah. Well, I mean, she is a Samba star. Yeah, so I think
it should go to others.
yeah, exactly. You should come to her and her come to you. But I'm thinking about the other women, like Donna Aurelia, Donna Dalva. Yeah, there are other women in other Samba groups that could be going, but they're not. And that's a good question.
Or just mothers and grandmothers that dance in their homes or on a Sunday, or like how much it's integrated within everyday life inside and outside school. Sorry, I'm really pushing the rest of it.
But I think women are the leaders of Samba Jahuda normally, like in the groups, and they're the ones who sponsor a Samba at their house, right? And it is, I don't know, I wouldn't say officially so, but to me the cultures feel very matrilineal there, that they're very female-centric. And so, I mean, that doesn't mean women are in charge or in power, but they're the center of life in many ways, in families and in communities. And so, so it is interesting that it's the men that are being hired in. And so, the particular men that were hired in, the ones that I met, they had the kind of jobs that they could take off and do this, in a way, that they finished work at a certain time and could go and do this. But what's interesting, and this is a tangent, I'll be brief, is that Seu Pingo and João both want to be professional Samba Jahuda artists. And so they see this as filling out their portfolio career as professional musicians, that they get hired out to perform, but they also get hired out to teach, and that they want to live from their art, which isn't something that's always been the case, right? This is a new phenomenon in the wake of UNESCO, that there's enough work, enough paid work in Samba Jahuda that you could make a living. And so they're trying very hard to do that, and so these programs are, in a way, an extension of that effort on their part. prior to UNESCO recognition, it would be very rare for anybody to be paid to do Samba Chahota. It'd be like somebody paying you to waltz. It just doesn't make sense. It's a community practice.
I just wonder if this is happening like a shift in the way the cultural memory of this dance is controlled, and a shift that has been marked by the UNESCO recognition. So as soon as the dance becomes recognized by the UNESCO, then it becomes a commodity in a way.
Yes.
So then you can have a profession, and women, because dance is normally associated with body and going out and using the body continuously to earn money. So perhaps women are gradually being marginalized, and control of the economical power that the dance can now bring as before. So I don't know, maybe it's just a shift.
The people that there's an associated with the Casa de Samba is an association of samba, sambadoras, sambaderas, so men and women who make samba. And all of the presidents that have been elected have been men so far since the recognition. All of them. Even though if you look around the room, it's mostly women that are heads of the samba groups, but they're not being elected. So I think there is a gendering going on. There's power now, right? That they're concerned about outsiders coming in and taking control of their Samba Chahota, but it also identifies that there's also a gender politics to who's benefiting from this Samba Chahota recognition, and that you're right, it does have to do with leaving the house, right? Like Dona Nicia, the mother, Joao, I think also she's got too much work to do at home to be going to school, you know? He's not going to cook. He lives with his mother, right? So
and she's probably like, get out of the house, you're bothering me, I need stuff to
do. Exactly. Is this going on the web? I don't know. Yeah, so no, it does have to do with commoditization.
Actually, if there is just 1 minute, is there? I
What?
wanted to just ask you if you have observed the body-to-body transmission, and if there is some difference between girls and boys. Maybe you have a little bit mentioned that, okay, in terms of movement, the girls are more containing the bodies, the boys are a bit more expressive, so I just wanted to ask you if you have observed in the way the movement is transmitted, boys and girls, and how they have to act and use their bodies in relation to each other.
What was interesting to me was, how are these guys going to teach the girls how to dance?
Yeah.
Like I didn't, and I never saw them give a lesson, right? What they did was they told the girls what not to do. So they would sit there and, and if they were dancing in a way they didn't like, sometimes they would stop playing. We're done. If you're going to dance like that, we're done. We're done.
So then the transmission happens in the domestic space because they watch their grandmother and their aunt.
Exactly. They already know Samba Chahota, right? They've seen it elsewhere. It's just a question of creating a space where it's celebrated, right, and valued. But yeah, the men are more likely to teach the drumming didactically, but the girls are learning at home, and then the men are just keeping the pedagogy out. Policing operation. Yeah, and it's in some ways it's just a question of that's too sexy, right? Not in this space. That's not what we're doing here. There's a policing of the girl's sexuality at in an age-appropriate way.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up there, but there's plenty of fruitful ideas coming out, definitely to bring up later. So thank you very much, Danielle.